So, for our keynote speaker, now this is I've been looking so forward to this, and I'm not sure exactly what Abel's going to say, but I know it's going to be good stuff. I'm a big fan of our next speaker. He's a real peace hero for sure. He's actually the founder of the Arkansas Nonviolence Alliance. He's a frequent writer for the Free Weekly. He does op-eds. Whenever there's an issue that is, like the mainstream, you can tell that the mainstream media has got it wrong, but you can't figure out which way is up. And Abel Tomlinson is one of the people I look to figure out how to unravel those sort of things. He's the one that goes beyond what we consider mainstream media. He digs deep, he does his research, he's very knowledgeable, and I think we're really lucky to have him. Of course, the whole Korean situation that we hear about daily now is really hard to understand, and there's a lot more to it than we're getting on the mainstream media. And so Abel has put together a piece called Facing Nuclear Madness from Hiroshima to North Korea, and I'm very pleased to have Abel Tomlinson with us. Thank you.
Well, my printer was broken, so I have to have this laptop. Good evening. Thank you for being here and this opportunity to speak. I'm actually deeply honored to be able to do this. We're gathered here today to mark the anniversary of the only nuclear bombings of people in history. You already know the horror and inhumanity of these savage attacks, so what more can be said? What can be said about our present danger? Is there hope? These are questions I'll attempt to answer, and I may repeat things you know, but redundancy can be helpful, and we're recording this for other people on the internet that may not know as much as you guys do. Let's start with the Manhattan Project. Only this week did I learn about physicist Joseph Rotblat, a superhero for peace, after watching The Strangest Dream. It's a free documentary online, I highly recommend it. Of many brilliant scientists working on the Manhattan Project, Rotblat was the only one to quit. After the project head, General Groves, told him the real purpose of making the bombs is to subdue the Soviets. Not only was Rotblat a hero for quitting, but afterward he became a great peace leader. He was an original signatory of the Einstein-Russell Manifesto, and with Bertrand Russell, created the subsequent Pugwash conferences, working for peace with top scientists all over the world. We'll return to Rotblat, but first let's discuss Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Evidence indicates these bombings were political. 6 out of 7 5-star admirals and generals of World War II said the bombings were either morally reprehensible, militarily unnecessary, or both. And these are not pacifists. Eisenhower repeatedly urged the bomb not be used. And these are his words. He said, Japan was already defeated and dropping the bomb was completely unnecessary. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Leahy, said, the nuclear attacks were barbarous violation of every Christian ethic I've ever heard and all the known laws of war. Yet what affects me most are stories from Hibakusha, the survivors. And I'll mention just one, which is more powerful than cold statistics of thousands or hundreds of thousands being killed. And this is kind of a moving story, and it's pretty graphic, so if anyone's sensitive, they might want to plug their ears for 1 minute. This is the testimony of Michiko Kodama. And this testimony is on the the Friends AFC, the Friends website, the Quakers, anyway. Michiko said, this is the testimony, of Michiko Kodama, calling for abolition of what she calls weapons of the devil. Michiko said, I was 7 years old, a second grader, inside the wooden school building. Suddenly, at 8:15 a.m., I felt a blinding flash, and then the ceiling collapsed, and sharp splinters flew all around. They stuck in the walls, desks, and the floor, and also into my skin. My father managed to find me, and as he carried me home, I witnessed hell on earth. I saw a man with his skin burned heavily and peeling. A mother was carrying a baby which looked like charcoal. She herself was heavily burned all over her body and was trying to flee, almost crawling on the ground. Others lost their sight, their eyeballs popped out, or ran around holding protruding intestines. People tried to cling on to us, saying, "Give me water, water, water." Unable to give help, we just left them there and hurried home. My favorite cousin, who was like a big sister to me, had her face, her entire back, and her right leg severely burned. Her burns quickly festered and flies swarmed. Soon maggots bred and crawled all over her body. All I could do for my beloved cousin was pick the maggots out and wipe her oozing body. After 3 days, she died in my arms. She was 14. And that's just half the story. You'll have to read it online if you want to finish it. After the bombings, many people were revolted, not least of which was Rotblat, Einstein, Bertrand Russell, Albert Schweitzer, and many others with beating hearts. This revulsion towards nuclear weapons was expressed well in the foundational document of the nuclear abolition movement, the Einstein-Russell Manifesto. And here's an excerpt of that manifesto. "Here then is the problem which we present to you, stark and dreadful and inescapable. Shall we put an end to the human race, or shall mankind renounce war? There lies before us, if we choose, continual progress in happiness, knowledge, and wisdom. Shall we instead choose death, because we cannot forget our quarrels? We appeal as human beings to human beings. Remember your humanity. Remember your humanity and forget the rest. If you can do so, the way lies open to a new paradise. If you cannot, there lies before you the risk of universal death." After this publication, the subsequent Pugwash conferences became very successful, providing background work for the partial test ban, non-proliferation, the anti-ballistic missile treaties, as well as the biological and chemical weapons conventions. Former Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara said Pugwash laid the groundwork for negotiations to end the Vietnam War. Gorbachev also admitted that the organization influenced his thinking while he was a Soviet leader, helping to end the Cold War. We'll skip many details of the Cold War, except to remember it was insane. Both sides built enough weapons and far bigger hydrogen bombs to threaten the existence of our entire species, not to mention other species. We must also remember over 2,000 nuclear tests were conducted, polluting the environment with radioactive waste. Not only did we poison our lands in Nevada and New Mexico, but we destroyed tropical islands with beautiful marine creatures surrounding them. Thankfully, progress was made. The Cold War ended, nuclear stockpiles were reduced, and testing halted. However, tensions between the US and Russia were never fully ameliorated. After the Berlin Wall fell, US leaders made verbal agreements with Russia not to expand NATO eastward. This was broken. The US pushed NATO bases closer and closer to Russian borders, with some bases holding nuclear warheads. Imagine you're Russian. Imagine you're a Russian citizen. How would you feel about increasingly being surrounded by military bases and nuclear bombs and war games? Answer: exactly how Americans felt during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Russians are living under constant threat, and with US wars across Southwest Asia, Putin even said in his Munich speech, I recommend you reading that, and mainstream media won't let you hear what he says. He's not the best person, but he does have some good things to say. And he said because of these wars in the Middle East and these threats, this results in the fact that no one feels safe. I want to emphasize this. No one feels safe. A similar scenario is occurring in North Korea. They too are encircled by US military bases. The US practices massive war games on the borders of North Korea, China, and Russia, and those are never mentioned in the media. They don't tell you about the massive war games that have been going on the borders of these countries. No wonder that people are frightened. No wonder they think a nuclear weapon might protect them, even though it just makes the problem worse. And not to mention the endless Middle East wars that are costing trillions upon trillions. Most alarmingly, the US is escalating tensions with these nuclear-armed nations. And a recent UN study said the threat of nuclear weapon detonation event in 2017 is arguably at its highest in the 26 years since the collapse of the Soviet Union. This return to Cold War-like confrontational postures has hindered international cooperation and confidence building. It's as if many people have forgotten what mutually assured destruction means. We hear about how crazy North Korean leaders are, but some of their actions are understandable. After the country was destroyed in the Korean War, they've since lived with constant military threat. And in that context, nuclear deterrence does make some sense. Also, what message did the United States send to North Korea when it overthrew Libya, a nation that abandoned its nuclear weapons program? This reinforces the dark logic of deterrence and undermines the rationale for eliminating nuclear weapons programs. As a nation, our moral authority on disarmament is hollow. The previous and current administrations have revived the Cold War, committing to $1 trillion modernization program to upgrade the nuclear arsenal. Great strides for nuclear abolition have been made, but in recent years we took a giant step back. The problem is the war profiteer complex, transcending both parties, with benefits from endless war and manufactured tension, not to mention record arms deals to dictatorships like Saudi Arabia. We also have an unpredictable and unpopular president on top of it. Unfortunately, one thing can rapidly improve presidential popularity: war. There is potential for war to expand further, and with movement toward war with Iran and North Korea, war with the latter promises to be especially horrific, with the possibility of thousands or millions of dead Koreans, not to mention the possibility that North Korea could actually deliver a bomb to an American city. The gravest danger is, though, the cumulative effect of these wars could reach a critical mass, a boiling point, where World War does break out, with unthinkable nuclear exchange. But with that said, let us discuss a glimmer of hope. On July 7th, 122 countries approved a treaty to ban nuclear weapons. We should give it up for those 122 countries. And this treaty will actually likely be ratified next month after 50 people sign it. It gets ratified by 50 countries, and then it becomes law. And then nuclear weapons will be illegal. No country with nuclear arms supports this treaty, though, but its power shouldn't be underestimated. Nuclear nations may cling to their bombs, but they will increasingly become outlaw pariahs like North Korea. The weapons will become delegitimized. It also promises to affect vitally important public opinion. And as some philosophers say, public opinion is the most important determinant in society. It's more important than, it's the ruler of society ultimately, whether you are a democracy or a dictatorship. However, we mustn't make the mistake of thinking this treaty is enough. And I'll quote Rotblat to make this point. And this is from his Nobel Prize acceptance speech, which he accepted that along with the Nobel Prize for the Pugwash Conference Institute. This is Rotblat. He said, "I've argued we must eliminate nuclear weapons. While this would remove the immediate threat, it will not provide permanent security. Nuclear weapons cannot be disinvented. In a nuclear weapon-free world, should any of the great powers become involved in a military confrontation, they could rebuild their arsenals. The danger of the ultimate catastrophe would still exist. The only way to prevent it is to abolish war altogether. We must learn to resolve disputes by means other than military confrontation, and will require developing a new loyalty to mankind, or I would say humankind. We have to become world citizens. Prospects for this new loyalty are now better because fantastic advances in modern communication techniques, as long as you don't touch it. These modern techniques allow us to learn instantly about events across the globe. Technology is driving us together, and we are becoming like one family." Psychologist Erich Fromm, I say Fromm, but it's probably Fromm. Psychologist Erich Fromm was another 20th century peace giant for nuclear abolition. He wrote about the other great peace leaders, Russell, Schweitzer, and Einstein, and he said what defined them was their faith in the power of reason and their intense love for life, or as Fromm calls biophilia, as opposed to necrophilia. And he says that people that really love war are kind of necrophiles. Fromm also warned our grave dangers are being facilitated by robotism and obedience. He wrote, "Human history began with an act of disobedience, and it is not unlikely that it will be terminated by an act of obedience. When people act like robots and obediently follow orders like machines, this is dangerous. Starting nuclear war requires not just a mad president pushing the button, but also obedient soldiers to follow the launch orders. It wasn't only Truman that dropped the bombs. We're taught obedience is a virtue. Yet, what if following an order or law conflicts with your conscience? Fromm urges we resist becoming robots by obeying our conscience and disobeying inhumane or unjust laws and orders. A statement repeated by Russell and Rotblat was, "Remember your humanity. Remember your humanity." One definition of humanity is the qualities that make us human, such as the ability to love, have compassion, be creative, and not be a robot. That was dictionary. I was like, what? Too easy. Thus, we must remember to love our whole human family and planet with empathy. Ultimately, I don't know for certain if we can avoid universal destruction, and I don't have concrete answers for political action. What I do know is that we all have some power. We can all take small actions, which can ripple around our planetary pond. If there is hope, it is this. We can read, think, write, and spark conversations with friends, families, and strangers. We can disobey social norms and discuss peace wherever we go. Raising consciousness and progressing public opinion is extremely important, especially by informing the world that nuclear weapons are becoming illegal. And that's what someone said that was discussing this abolition, or this treaty to abolish nuclear weapons. Even when the United States may resist and not want to get rid of its nuclear weapons, it's really important for public opinion to come along and say, hey, let's catch up with the rest of the world. And we can also donate or participate in many peace organizations like OMNI and many others. There's many organizations working to abolish nuclear weapons. We can support the Marshallese Nuclear Zero lawsuits, most simply by signing their petition at nuclearzero.org. We can participate in events like this as well as protests, and they may include civil disobedience. For those of us that resist robotism, we have creativity. We can create ideas that never existed. All great social evolution started with one creative idea, inspiring first a small group of people. As Margaret Mead said, this is the only thing that ever changed the world. We must boldly face the hard, cold truth about nuclear madness. We must embody prayer in action instead of praying quietly alone at home. This very event and this very speech is such an active prayer for peace. Above all, we must resist despair. And I'll conclude with Dr. King's Nobel Prize acceptance speech, a quote from it. I'm sure you've heard it, but I'm going to do it anyway. King said, "I refuse to accept despair, or the idea that man is mere flotsam and jetsam in the river of life, unable to influence the unfolding events which surround him. I refuse to accept the view that mankind is so tragically bound to the starless midnight of racism and war, that the bright daybreak of peace and brotherhood can never become a reality. I refuse to accept the cynical notion that nation after nation must spiral down a militaristic stairway into the hell of thermonuclear destruction. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word." Thank you.